Hello, welcome back to the Your Town television program. I'm Mark Baer. My next guest is David Book, BuzzTouch, and welcome.
Thank you.
So in full disclosure, we're longtime friends. Nobody can ever get together here. Everybody's busy, so I figure you're on TV. I can show up and I can see you.
Absolutely.
We can never even get together
Mark
anymore.
and I have known each other for a very long time, and it's great to be in your setting. This is really neat, and I'm a big fan of local content and shows like Your Town, so I think this will be a fun conversation.
Well, BuzzTouch.
BuzzTouch. What is BuzzTouch? So BuzzTouch.com is a website and software package I put together a few years ago, about 4 years ago actually, with the idea that there was a lot of people out there who wanted to publish content and apps to a mobile device, an iPhone, an iPad, things like that. My suspicion was that they weren't going to be able to do that. So I put a piece of software together and a community together to help those kinds of folks succeed in what is now an industry, the app industry. And so we'd encourage anyone who has any interest in creating an app, which is now a household name, to pursue that, to pursue their idea.
So let's talk a little bit. So
Sure.
This sounds, you make it sound rather humble, but BuzzTouch is a big deal.
And it is turning into a big deal.
You're getting some big numbers. So let's talk about some of the numbers that you're talking about that of your users.
Yeah, so as it turns out, there's a bit of an industry around not just apps and not just mobile publishing, but this concept of do-it-yourself publishing. And in essence, an app on your phone, on your iPhone or your Android or your iPad is a piece of software. And making software traditionally was reserved for computer scientists and people with a lot of experience and skill. And so a lot of tools and a lot of approaches have been released recently to help a larger number of people do that, which was exactly my suspicion. So I'd like to think that we were not the inventor of that idea, but very early on in that approach. So naturally, we do tend to get a lot of that audience. And so more than 1 million people have visited our site, and a couple of 100,000 people have signed up and tried to use it, and 10 or 20,000 people each month come back and manage these apps that they've made. And so pretty big numbers in our world, right? Local Your Town business people. In the world of the internet, it could be argued that we have a lot of ways to go. So that's what we're trying to do, is help more and more people succeed. Because after all, if they make an app that doesn't have much success, then they won't need us anymore, right? So we want to encourage them to do well and help them technically. And so a lot of the focus on our site is community driven. And so aspiring developer helping aspiring developer is a big part of this.
So a little bit about you.
Yeah.
You're the closest thing that I know besides myself. You're pretty close to a mad scientist. I asked David, I said, well, are you the next Tumblr? I mean, I read the paper, I'm like,
Sure.
is Tumblr happening? You don't really pay attention to those numbers. You're really about either that or you're not telling me the truth, but you're really about the thing.
I'm
thing is your passion.
Most innovative in creating things. So I'm a creative guy. I like to solve problems. And so, of course, we can't ignore news like yesterday's Tumblr acquisition for the listeners who don't know.
Why don't you explain what that means?
So Tumblr is a content creation platform. That's the nerd way to say if you want to put content online, you need tools. And so Tumblr is one of those tools. Things like Blogger and WordPress are others. And so a large audience uses this site and this tool called Tumblr, and they were acquired yesterday by Yahoo, which is a company that most people have heard of.
Well, let's talk about the
for
numbers.
More than $1 billion with a B, right?
That's a lot of money.
It's a very big number, and there's some other acquisitions in our technology past, we like to say, last 6-8 months that are pretty staggering. Facebook bought a company for $1 billion, and the numbers are pretty extreme. But yeah, I don't necessarily focus on those kinds of things for a couple of reasons. One is it's very distracting. Yeah. I could be, as an entrepreneur, I could be very, very focused on that aspect of it, trying to maybe seek an acquirer or an investor or anything like that. Or I can focus on product and customers. And I tend to focus on product and customers.
So the investor will, if you focus on product and customers, if you just be you make the thing the best thing, and you, I knowing you do what excites you.
Sure.
You do not do anything that doesn't excite you.
That's correct. I'm a little bit of a maverick in that way.
Yeah,
yes.
What excites you, and so they'll find you if they want you.
Yeah, and That's generally true.
And, you've been courted. You've had a lot of
people
courting.
have shown some interest in maybe having a more meaningful relationship with a larger company, but not in a way that yet is distracting enough. Let's just say that. And so, yeah, there's a couple of different types of ways to start an online technology company, a startup. One way is to do it the way we like to think that we did it, which is on our own and kind of homegrown and product-driven and community-driven. And the other way, of course, is big investment-driven. And we haven't taken any big investment or focused on that. Whether we do or we don't in the future is yet to be known. I wish I knew those answers. But like you alluded to with this question, I hole up in a sailboat with a computer and write code and create things and love to do that. So it's very hard for me to kind of look up a little bit and try to run a business. I mean, this didn't start as a business after all. This started as a...
Nothing you do starts as a business.
Right, exactly. I had a hunch that people would want to make software for this gadget. 2007, I was at Macworld and watched Steve Jobs introduce this personal communicator from Star Trek. And all of us nerds were just amazed and literally let out a gasp, right as he showed us this phone. And I knew right away that there's going to be, I call it the 10,000 to 1 problem. I think there's 10,000 people who want to put software and content on a device to everyone that can. And so I'm trying to help those 9,999 people do it. And that's been my focus. And as it turns out, I was right in a lot of ways. There's a lot of people who want to do it. It's hard.
Now, again, not everybody in the technology world wants you to succeed.
Yeah, there's a lot of barriers that aren't very obvious.
Yeah, let's talk about some of that.
Exactly. And so, there's a couple of companies that are in essence in charge of mobile right now. Not literally and not completely, but almost. And so if you think of Apple and you think of Google and Android and you think of companies like that, most of us with a smartphone are customers of theirs. And so in the not too distant past, companies like RIM, BlackBerry, they were the top of the list. Companies like Motorola were the top of the list. Where are they? Right? There's a couple of big players, Apple and Google, that have their own motives. And there's a reason that they don't want everyone out there just throwing content onto these phones. Think of things like quality. Think of things like, do you want your phone riddled with apps that maybe are just marketing gimmicks? Or there's a balancing act that they're playing in attracting developers in genuine content and functionality versus turning people away who are very creative and maybe aren't programmers. So it's a tough line to walk. And so they're walking that line, and I'm walking that line, I think, along with them. And I encourage people to embrace Apple's guidelines in terms of what makes a good app and not try to skirt any rules or anything like that. We're not about taking shortcuts. We're about helping people who actually want to make a piece of software.
So that keeps your quality. What do you do for quality control, or how do you judge, or do people just kind of naturally fall away that don't have a good product?
Yeah, there's a little bit of natural turnover. The market, we don't distribute software. So in order to put software on your gadget, on your phone, you need a distribution method. And so in the case of iPhone, we're all used to iTunes. We visit iTunes on our phone and we buy or download an app. And so Apple controls that distribution channel. BuzzTouch does not do anything with distribution. We help someone make the application that they would then give to Apple to distribute. And so the reason that that's important is we don't have a way to know how successful that application will be. Mm-hmm. And what is successful?
Do you have a sense of how many BuzzTouch enhanced products are successful?
Absolutely,
okay.
Absolutely. And there's a reason for that. A lot of the applications, in fact, most of the applications on your phone right now have a dependency on some external source. Think of a magazine application. It needs to download its content from someone. Think of the ESPN sports application. It needs to get the scores from someplace. And so BuzzTouch.com and our infrastructure serves as that back end for a lot of apps. And of course, because of that, we then gather a lot of statistics and a lot of information about who's succeeding and who's not succeeding. But the point I was going to make was there's not really any way for you and I to define what success is for an app. If you're a high school teacher and you want to make an app for 30 math students, your definition of success is not distribution in the App Store in the top 10 list. If you're an employer and you want a specialized piece of software for your employee in his pocket, maybe he checks in when he arrives at a location or something, again, you don't need the App Store to succeed. By and large, most people who pursue this interest or hobby are trying to make a little money, right? They want to get an application that either sells products or promotes products or sells the software itself for $1 or $2. Think of a game developer, right? They're going to want to attract an audience, and that's what Apple helps them do. And so we'd like to think that we can predict in advance how successful something's going to be, but we're surprised every day with apps that are seemingly a gimmick that take off, right? They just take off. And guys like you and I aren't usually the drivers behind that. There's another generation that kind of controls that today, where all the enthusiasm comes from. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I'm still fascinated with it. It's very fascinating.
So what is your, what's kind of getting your interest now? If let's say this went away tomorrow with a big check.
No, well,
and you didn't go with it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. What would I do next?
Yeah.
That's a difficult question, of course, because you know this better than anybody. I have a very long list of things that are, to be pursued by me or by somebody else. I'd like to make a phone, and I'm not embarrassed by saying that this phone has a lot of room for improvement. And making a piece of hardware, not only from a design perspective and a hardware perspective, but from a software perspective, I'd love to try to do that. And I'm not sure if I'll get that chance. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. And a lot of people who are in the technology field are maybe chuckling right now, because there's not a lot of folks who have a software product or a website that happens to be kind of busy that come out and say, I'm going to make a new computer or I'm going to make a phone. But I think I can make an improvement to this phone model that we have now. That's now getting old, right? A lot of people think this is new. This is old now. This is 5 or 6 years old. And after all, the PC, what did it last, 20 years? 25? It's dying, right? Now this thing, 5 or 6 years later, to enthusiasts like myself, it feels a little old. It's time to fix it. So whether Google does that or Apple does that or somebody else, I'd like to try.
That's pretty good.
Well, good or daring.
Yeah, no, that's pretty bold.
When you paint and you think that all of the painting out there is not right, you have an opportunity to make a better painting. And I know we have a guest today on the show who's a painter and who maybe can relate to that. But when you create things and you solve problems, or you feel like you're trying to solve problems, then everything's full of problems. This phone is full of problems, right? There's probably a better way to set up the technology in this studio and things like that. And so I focus on phones. So I see it a little differently than you. So to me, it isn't that daring. It isn't that risky. It just needs to be done. And maybe I'll get the time to do that. Maybe I won't.
But
it needs to be done, though.
So the big, and again, why I feel that you will be lucky is because you haven't been focused on the big payoff. Because you've been focused on the work. And you've helped a lifestyle that you've gotten your kids to college.
Well, one's leaving and the other's halfway to college.
You've managed to have a nice sailboat.
Yeah, we're happy on the bay.
You live in Pacific Grove, which is a very nice place to live.
Yeah.
Your wife still loves you.
I'm blessed.
She puts up with you.
You're exactly right.
And so you've made wise, admirable lifestyle choices, which I think has allowed you to keep your integrity. And integrity is a big part of things. And why don't you address what your sense of integrity is? Because I think it's unique.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I consider that a compliment. And all of what you just said is very true and very deliberate. I think a lot of us, let me back up a little bit. My wife, Lynn, who I've known my entire life, I met her in first grade, we're pretty simple people. And I may be a complicated guy in my mind with software and technology and gadgets and invention and creation and all that kind of stuff. But in terms of our lifestyle, I think our priorities are pretty straight. And we don't, we're not about gathering things and belongings and a lot of that kind of mainstream stuff, kind of consumerism, right? And I think that that's a blessing. That's not necessarily intentional. And I'm not claiming that we're somehow better or anything.
It's not necessarily an aesthetic choice.
No, it just turned out that way, right? We're pretty simple folks. Yeah. And so because of that, I think that's allowed me to keep a different viewpoint on things. I don't have what I would consider to be an expensive lifestyle. It might appear that because I live in Pacific Grove and I've got a boat, but after all, it's a 40-year-old boat, right? And so to someone who's not a boater, maybe, but we're pretty simple people. Lynn drives an old Volkswagen van. for example, right? I mean, that's a conscious choice that makes a lot of sense from a logical
Your
perspective.
kids are both very impressive. And,
so thank you for all the compliments.
You've done some good things. But I guess my point of this is by having a bit of simplicity in your life, by having values that you know or what you have is valuable, by not striving materialistically, by not putting your life that direction, you've allowed yourself to the luxury of focusing on what you want to think about.
That's a great way to put it.
And that's a great luxury. And I think one of the things that impresses me is that's a luxury.
Yeah, and I set out to find it. And there's a certain term now that's becoming more and more common called the backpack lifestyle. And there's a certain generation and audience of people who believe very strongly that if you want to have a lifestyle that doesn't include a schedule and doesn't include a boss and doesn't include a traditional job, you can do that. And that opportunity is available to you today. That wasn't the case not very long ago. And people that I looked up to said, go to college, get a job for 40 years, you'll be fine. And they were right when they said it. Right? But that's not necessarily right today. And so there's a certain backpack lifestyle that is suddenly available, and in some cases mandatory if you're the kind of person who's been laid off or you don't have a skill that's sellable in this era or whatever. And so, yeah, I deliberately wanted to have that lifestyle, but it's not because I had the vision that somehow, that was going to be the way or anything like that. It just kind of turned out that way.
Well, when the big payday comes.
Well, you keep referring to this payday.
Yeah, I'm keeping my fingers crossed.
So let's do this.
You get the backpack.
Yeah, exactly. I can wrap up everything that you just said, I think, which started with, I'm a creator and not a business person. Think of it this way.
Think of 30 seconds.
Think in 30 seconds?
Yeah.
Okay, deal. If you're a musician and you like music, you don't make music so that you can get on the radio. You make music because you like making music. And whether anyone hears it or a lot of people hear it, it's still what you like to do. So that's how I look at making software. It just turns out that I got on the radio a little bit. It doesn't mean it's going to be on the radio for a long time. Right now, there's a little bit of radio. Other than that.
My guest, David Book. Right on, buddy.
So anyway.
This is the Your Town television program. I'm Mark Baer.